Genghis Khan. You know, just hearing that name brings up these images of a ruthless, unstoppable conqueror, right? A guy who built one of the biggest empires ever on just pure terror and bloodshed. For centuries, he's been the ultimate warlord. But is that the whole story? Let's dig in and see if we can find the man behind the myth.
And this quote? Wow. This is what he supposedly said, and it perfectly captures that legend. He wasn't just a conqueror in his own story. He was a force of nature, a divine punishment. Think about that for a second. Whether he really believed it or it was just some brilliant, terrifying PR, it worked. It struck absolute fear into the hearts of his enemies.
And the scale of that punishment is just, it's hard to even wrap your head around. Some estimates say his campaigns led to the deaths of 40 million people. To give you some perspective, that was a huge chunk of the entire world's population back then. It was a demographic catastrophe on a level the world had rarely, if ever, seen.
And this wasn't just random, mindless cruelty. Oh no, this was a highly organized, ice-cold strategy. If your city decided to resist, it wasn't just defeated, it was often erased from the map. They'd use captives as human shields, forcing them to attack their own cities. And if a place they conquered dared to rebel, they'd systematically execute the entire local leadership. The message couldn't have been clearer: surrender or you will be annihilated.
So this brings us to the big question, right? How does one guy born in the middle of nowhere end up ruling an empire that stretched from Korea all the way to Hungary? Was it really just about being the most brutal, terrifying guy on the block? Or was there something else going on?
To really get it, you have to look at where he came from. He wasn't born a king. He was born Temujin. When he was just a boy, his father was murdered. And then his own clan, they just abandoned him and his family, left them to starve on the brutal Mongolian steppe. So he grew up as a powerless outcast, literally fighting for every scrap of food in a world of constant violent warfare. His entire childhood was just a masterclass in betrayal and survival.
And this right here is the paradox. I mean, based on that upbringing, he should have turned into a petty, forgettable tyrant, right? He was illiterate, grew up in extreme poverty and violence. Everything about his early life suggests he should have been suspicious, cruel, and focused only on himself.
So what happened? What changed? Was he just an unbelievable military commander who took the brutal tactics he grew up with and perfected them? Or did he become something more? Something that his background gives us absolutely no reason to expect. And this is where the whole story shifts. This is where he goes from being just a conqueror to a nation builder. Instead of just ruling the old tribes, he completely smashed them apart. He reorganized his entire people, his entire army, into a system based on tens, hundreds, and thousands, mixing up all the old clans to destroy old loyalties and build a new, single Mongol identity. And, get this, in a world that ran entirely on who your father was, he did something truly revolutionary. He promoted his generals based on skill and loyalty, not their family name. Then, to hold this new nation together, he created a secret legal code called the Yasa. We don't know all the details, but we know it demanded total obedience to him, the Khan. But it also laid down the law for everyone, on everything from theft to adultery. It was designed to stop the infighting that had always plagued the Mongols. And yeah, the punishments were absolutely merciless. Okay, so you've built a nation. How do you actually run a massive continent-spanning empire in the 13th century? Well, you invent the Yam. This thing was basically the world's first national postal service. It was this incredible network of relay stations with fresh horses and riders always ready to go. It meant that messages, spies reports, and imperial commands could fly across the empire at incredible speeds, connecting the whole thing together. It was like a medieval internet. So these incredible systems, this is how he built the empire. But building it is one thing. Actually holding it all together, that's a whole different story. And that's where we find the biggest contradictions of his entire role. Just look at this contrast. It's wild. On one hand, you have the brutal conqueror we all know, the guy who leveled entire civilizations. On the other hand, you have a ruler who put in place policies that were literally centuries ahead of their time. He established universal religious freedom across his entire empire. He made clergy and the poor exempt from taxes. He even forbade the common practice of kidnapping women. And he used that terrifying army of his to make trade routes safer than they'd ever been. And here's a fact that just completely flips the script. At one point, a group of Muslims actually came to Genghis Khan asking for his help against their Christian ruler who was persecuting them.
Khan's army rolled in, defeated their oppressor, and established religious freedom. And for doing that, those Muslims gave him the title Defender of Religion. I mean, how crazy is that?
But we have to be careful here. Let's not get too carried away. His tolerance was practical, not philosophical. For example, he issued decrees that banned certain Islamic and Jewish practices, like specific ways of butchering animals and even circumcision. Why? Because Mongol law came first. His policies were all about creating a stable, unified empire. Religious freedom was a tool to achieve that, not some deeply held modern ideal.
So what happens when you mix all this together? This unbelievable brutality with this surprisingly organized and, at times, progressive rule? Well, you get something historians now call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For about 100 years, the Mongol Empire enforced a period of stability and order across most of Eurasia. And you can see the effect right here. The Mongol peace totally transformed the Silk Road. Before the Mongols, it was a dangerous, broken-up chain of paths. You didn't travel the whole thing. Goods were passed from one trader to the next. But under the Mongols, for the first time, one person, one caravan, could travel safely all the way from Europe to China. It became a unified superhighway for trade. And that created a whole new kind of world. It wasn't just silk and spices being traded anymore. It was people, merchants like Marco Polo, diplomats, missionaries. And the most important thing of all? It was ideas. Science, technology, religion, new maps. It all started flowing back and forth across Eurasia on a scale that had never happened before, all under the watchful eye of the Mongol Khans. And it seems Genghis Khan himself had a sense of the legacy he was building. This quote from him is pretty incredible. He's thinking generations ahead. He knew he was creating a world of such peace and prosperity that his descendants wouldn't even remember the brutal, bloody foundations it was all built on. Which leaves us with this final, impossible question. Genghis Khan was a destroyer of worlds. The death and suffering he caused are almost unimaginable. But he was also a unifier, an innovator, a man who, through all that destruction, connected East and West in a way nobody had before. So, how do we judge a leader like that? How do we make sense of a man whose brutal legacy is so tangled up with the creation of our modern, interconnected world?